Hello and welcome back. My name is Carissa and I'm a mental performance consultant. I work with women and girl athletes, really prioritizing their holistic well-being and supporting their performance and an enjoyable experience as they pursue their athletic goals. Today I am wanting to chat with you about a topic that is very close to my heart. We're going to talk about self-compassion in sport, cutting edge literature, things that are just coming out, things that we're just finding out. That's what we're going to talk about today. So I will start by offering a definition of what self-compassion is. I'll summarize some trends in the literature and then talk a little bit about where self-compassion in sport research is going. The way Neff described self-compassion was that it's really being nurturing towards yourself. It's treating yourself the way that you would treat a friend and knowing that you deserve to be free from suffering. Things are going to suck sometimes, but you're also willing to give yourself whatever it is that you need to not prolong any difficult moments that you're going through. Even though self-compassion sounds really soft to some people, there is also a really fierce and encouraging side. One example that Kristen Neff would use was kind of like a mother bear, where a mother bear might be really gentle and kind with her little one. Mama bear is also not afraid to do something. Mama bear is not afraid to make a mess and do what she needs to do when it means keeping her little cub safe. So self-compassion is as much soft and nurturing as it is fierce and encouraging, because you are essentially willing to do whatever you need to do to stay well. I also think it's important to note that self-compassion can be learned. So if some of these traits don't sound like you, or if you're interested in how can I get more of this, because I think it's such a wonderful thing, self-compassion can be learned. I will personally attest to that. So going on and to share a little bit more about trends in the literature from a higher up perspective, the self-compassion in sport literature is one of the only areas that emphasizes women athletes or female athletes and their experiences in sport. A lot of sport literature, including sports psych literature, emphasizes men and male experiences. So it's really great to be working in an area that actually cares about women athletes. I think that that's a really, really important thing to note. Something also to keep in mind is that as I chat about where the current state of the literature is, that a lot of the research that has been done is correlational. That means all we're doing is seeing relationships between something. Basically, if we're seeing self-compassion go up and something else go up at the same time, that's a positive relationship. If we're seeing self-compassion go up and something else come down, that means they have an inverse relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that self-compassion is creating a greater presence or reducing the presence of some of these variables, but it's just saying we're noticing that as self-compassion gets higher, so does this thing, or vice versa, or could go down as well. So there are two studies that came out, one in 2019 by Rothland and colleagues, and another in 2023 was published by Cormier and colleagues. They offered summaries of the current self-compassion in sport literature. So what I'm basically doing is looking at both of these papers and putting together the summary of what they found to make it easy and digestible for you to understand. I want this to make sense to you. So I'm going to chat about some of the benefits these articles listed, as well as some of the resistance that can come with self-compassion in sport. I'll also talk about some of the important steps to becoming more self-compassionate, and then finish off with a bit of what we don't know to summarize the current state. When we're talking about the benefits of self-compassion, it's really great to see that athletes generally value becoming more self-compassionate. They believe that self-compassion contributes to their long-term success and offers a competitive edge. How self-compassion does that is by allowing athletes to take a little bit more balanced view of their performance, where they're not emphasizing mistakes, but they're also not like glorifying success either. So when you have this balanced way of thinking about your performance, you are able to learn from mistakes and set realistic expectations for the future, but also really push and challenge yourself, because you're not quite afraid of making mistakes, or you're not afraid of underperforming. So you just are willing to lay it out all on the line. Those are a couple of ways that self-compassion has been viewed as contributing to long-term success and a competitive edge for athletes. Self-compassion is also related to higher well-being and adaptive personality traits. I also think it's important to note that when I talk about well-being in this research, self-compassion is related to like a very holistic well-being. Self-compassion isn't just saying people experience more happiness. Self-compassion is saying people experience a sense of ease and satisfaction and contentment with their life. Because there's a few different ways of thinking about well-being, and self-compassion is related to that, like really higher level. Are you just like satisfied in living a really good life, despite the chaos and ups and downs that sometimes life can throw at you? I'm going to summarize a few of these adaptive traits or variables that show up in the research. Those include body appreciation, self-confidence, self-acceptance, optimism, perfectionistic striving, flow, and help seeking. Body appreciation is pretty straightforward. It's basically saying, I have a body and I appreciate it. But we also live in a very appearance-focused world. So body appreciation is really about, this is my body and I appreciate what it does for me. And I think that's so powerful for athletes, because you put your body through the ringer. Your body does so much for you, and your body absolutely deserves to be appreciated. The trend that we see is that as self-compassion goes up, so does body appreciation, where the more self-compassionate you are, the more you're able to just like see what your body does for you and be like, oh, yes, this is good. Thank you, body, for doing what you do. Self-confidence is probably a word that you've heard before, and it is the belief that you have in yourself. Self-acceptance is similar to body appreciation in a sense, but it's a little bit more. Instead of just the physical body, self-acceptance goes into like our personality traits, how we tend to show up in spaces, and it's not necessarily about celebrating and appreciating everything you got going on in your humanness, but it's at least saying like, we're okay with what's there. It's knowing that we're not going to like every single thing that we do, and we're going to be awkward sometimes, and we're going to not always make the best choices. And self-acceptance is just a really balanced, neutral, like, it is what it is, and what else can we do now? Optimism is really about just being hopeful for the future. Martin Seligman wrote a really good book called Learned Optimism, where he talks about what optimism is versus pessimism and the physical health benefits you get from being optimistic. And when we're looking at figuring out if someone is more optimistic or pessimistic, we look at three different things in how they talk to themselves or how they explain why things happen to them. One is personalization. 2 is pervasiveness, and I think 3 is persistence. I'll explain them. So personalization is essentially when something bad happens to you, is it because you are a failure and you suck and you did something awful, or is it because, well, like life happens and we can't control everything around us? So the more personal you make something, the more pessimistic it is. The more it's just like, oh, well, life kind of happens, the more optimistic you might be. Pervasiveness is essentially if it's consistent across contexts. You are an athlete, and you are a student, and you are a child to somebody, and maybe you have siblings, and maybe you have friends. Like, you exist in all these different contexts in your life. You're like, I suck in general. That's just how I am. Might be more pervasive. Where if you more so explain that something bad happened to you because it's like, oh, we were in a really tough spot, or maybe you're trying something new and you're like, oh, I'm not great at this new thing because I'm new at it. And that's okay. You might be more optimistic because it's less pervasive. And the third one being persistence is it sort of timeless? It's sort of never ending, where that idea of, oh, I suck at this. And if you think I'm never really going to get better at it, more pessimistic. But if you're like, ooh, I'm not great at this right now, but I'm so excited to learn and get better at it, and I'm willing to master it and put the work in, more optimistic, because you're hopeful that things are going to change and you trust that you can learn and take control of some of the things to get better at it. So that is optimism. Another factor that is related to self-compassion is perfectionistic striving. Perfectionistic striving is potentially a good thing. There are so many different types of perfectionism. Most of them are related to a lot of negative variables where it can be really overwhelming to be a perfectionist. Being a perfectionist is often about wanting everything to be just so. And if things aren't just so, we're not okay. Perfectionistic striving, though, is the difference between I need everything to be perfect and I'm going to do everything in my power to be excellent. And I'm going to strive for perfection, knowing that if I'm not perfect, I'm going to be okay. I don't have to be perfect, but I am going to put in the work to be as perfect as I can, as excellent as I can, because I don't think perfect ever exists. We all put our own little flavor onto things, and that's beautiful. That's what makes life fun. So self-compassion is related to perfectionistic strivings, which is a little bit of a healthier form of perfectionism, because then it's self-compassion. Once push comes to shove, I know I don't have to be perfect to be valuable, but I am going to be as excellent as I can. You're an athlete, you're a high performer, you compete, you care about what you do. We want to be as excellent as we can be. The next variable that self-compassion is related to is called flow. If you're an athlete or maybe an artist, or maybe even as a student, you might have experienced a moment of studying or engaging in your art or being in a game where you just sort of lose your sense of self, you lose a track of time. It almost feels like you're putting in just the right amount of effort and things are lining up just so, and you're just like one with the moment. That's flow. So we see that as self-compassion goes up, so does the frequency of flow experiences. Finally, self-compassion is related to help seeking. Help seeking is essentially just like, who can I ask for help? Who might have the information that I need to reduce the suffering that we talked about? Or who might have information that I need to avoid potential suffering? This could be like going to your coach to say, hey coach, something funky's going on. Can you come watch what I'm doing? Or, hey coach, I don't quite understand this rotation. Can you explain this to me again? Or, hey, mom or dad, I have this thing going on. Can you help me with it? So being self-compassionate means you're not afraid to ask for help. You know that it's okay to ask for help. You ask for help because you know it's going to push you in the direction that you want to go. So those are a lot of different things that self-compassion is positively related to. We also see a lot of things that self-compassion is negatively related to. And when I say negatively related to these things, I don't mean that it's a bad thing or it's a bad relationship. It just means that as we get more self-compassionate, we see these things less often, or they're less intense. Depends on how they're being measured and what they are. Self-compassion is related to less shame and less self-criticism, which we like. We would love for you to have less shame and less criticism as an athlete. Shame really means that you're like, I'm a bad person because I made a mistake. Taking accountability is just like, oh yeah, that's on me. I know that was my fault. But shame is like can really create this like dwelling heaviness that comes with making mistakes or not quite living up to what you hope to achieve. Self-criticism, like that inner voice, that inner bully in your head that like tells you suck at stuff, which we also don't want for you. So if we can be a little bit more self-compassionate, we generally see that self-criticism goes down. What's interesting is that self-criticism, along with rumination. Rumination is like that hamster wheel you get in your head when you're just mulling over mistakes over and over and you can't stop it and it's causing you distress. When self-compassionate people are going through difficult times, they are less hard on themselves and they experience less of that hamster wheel cycle that is very common for athletes. So self-compassion seems to free up a lot of brain space, particularly when things aren't going well. Now, this is a lot of like brain stuff, like the psychology, what's going on in our brains. Something that I think is also really fascinating is that self-compassion is related to differences in our physiology, like in how our bodies operate. Self-compassion is related to fewer somatic symptoms and is related to greater heart rate variability. So when I talk about somatic symptoms, I mean like the butterflies you get in your stomach pre-game, maybe some sweaty palms. It could be like a racing heart or high blood pressure. Like so many things go on in our body when we get stressed out. Self-compassion essentially like buffers that response. Self-compassion makes that body response less intense, so you don't get as intense of those like butterflies and whatnot. Heart rate variability is a way that we measure our stress response and our body's ability to adapt to stressful situations. When I say there's greater heart rate variability, that's a good thing. It basically means that your heart rate is able to adapt faster to changes. Self-compassion essentially makes your physiology more adaptable. And kind of what I think of that is like when something happens that is challenging, instead of holding on to it in our bodies are like, no, it's okay. We can let go of this. We don't have to stay high strung and worry about it happening again. We can let this go and it helps our body relax. But that's what my brain thinks is going on. Unfortunately, we still got some old school sport culture going on. Old school sport culture is all about fighting and being better and always having to one-up each other and be tough and put some dirt on it and show no emotions. The idea of self-compassion doesn't sit well with everybody. There are these fears that self-compassion will lead to being satisfied with mediocrity, and thinking self-compassion will essentially be a cop-out. Or if I'm self-compassionate, I'm just going to throw in the towel and not even try. What's really important to know, if you're the type of person who is worried about self-compassion creating like a sense of resignation or like, I'm not even going to try. Self-compassion actually is not related to disengagement or distraction during challenges. Research done with athletes says that if you're self-compassionate, it's got no relationship to people's tendencies to distract or disengage from challenges. And in fact, I know that there's another paper out there, I believe Dr. Leah Ferguson and her colleagues wrote this paper that talked about taking personal responsibility. Women athletes who are self-compassionate tend to take more personal responsibility, which that they're like, hey, I have this challenge in front of me, I'm going to do something about it. So even though there's this fear because of sport culture that self-compassion is going to make us soft and weak, this is where the fieriness of it comes out, where it's like, no, I have this challenge. Let me do something about it. I care. Let me show up for myself and for the goals that I have for myself. The benefits, a little bit of resistance and hesitation. And if you're like bought in and you're like, yes, self-compassion is for me. If you're wanting to become more self-compassionate, building self-awareness is a really important part of that process. And there are a lot of different supports that can go into place to help you with that reflection process, because it's not always fun to deep dive into what you got going on. But if you're wanting to learn and become more self-compassionate, starting to reflect is a really important step. What we still don't understand about self-compassion in sport is how self-compassion is related to various ways of coping. There's a few different ways you can conceptualize coping and coping skills, such as problem-focused coping, which is taking action and doing something about the problem, but also emotion-focused coping, which is all about changing the way you think about a challenge or a problem. The way I think about it is that if you're self-compassionate, you are doing whatever you can with the tools and skills that you have to put yourself in the best position possible. That means you're going to use a variety of coping skills, and the coping skills that you use are probably going to change depending on what the challenge is. Is the challenge something you can change? Problem-focused coping might make sense. Maybe you want to get stronger. As an athlete, you want to get stronger in the gym, something you have a little bit of control over. You say, if I want to get stronger in the gym, I need to update my training protocols. I need to update my dry land. So then you update your dry land, you stick to the plan. You've taken action and done something about the problem of being physically less strong. If you have a challenge that you can't change, like the weather, if you're somebody who plays an outdoor sport, you can't change the weather. So why would problem-focused coping help? Something like emotion-focused coping can be helpful in situations where you can't control what's going on. You can't control the challenge. So you just kind of have to accept the fact that maybe the weather is gross on a particular day and be okay with it because you know you can't change it. What you can change in that situation is how you dress. I think self-compassion is really about saying, what do I have access to? And what can I pick and choose based on the situation that's going to put me in the best position possible? We still don't know exactly what's going on when it comes to self-compassion and coping skills, but generally we see that self-compassion helps reduce emotional intensity around challenges and is related to more effective coping versus a consistent type of coping. We're still seeing really positive things in this self-compassion and coping literature. We're just still trying to untangle that. We're also still trying to understand how self-compassion is related to performance in sport. And I have some speculations about this. Again, my ideas. I haven't read about this. The research, what's out there, shows that self-compassion is inversely related with performance satisfaction. So the people who are more self-compassionate are generally less satisfied with their performance, but also positively related to performance ratings, which says that if I'm more self-compassionate, I'm more likely to rate myself in a positive way. Is that these are two different ways of measuring performance. Performance satisfaction is not the same thing as how I rated my performance. I could think, hey, I had a really great day out on the field, but I'm not super satisfied with it because I want to do better, or because my goal was this and I didn't accomplish that goal. So even though my general play was good, there's still a sense of dissatisfaction because maybe you missed one of your goals. And both of those things can exist. Part of what I think might be happening is that being self-compassionate provides us with a balanced way of viewing ourselves and viewing our performance. And we're okay with being yeah, I did good. But self-compassion is also saying I want what's best for me and my goals really matter to me. So if this performance wasn't related to goals that I had set out for myself, I might not be satisfied with it. Or because I'm high achieving and because I have this perfectionist striving of wanting to be excellent, even though it was good, there was just something missing about it. And even though we're a little bit dissatisfied, that might fuel the hunger we have to be competitive as athletes and as high performers. We're not dwelling in the dissatisfaction. We're just that's a twinge. I know I could do better. And then self-compassion is what do you got to do? What's the next step? That's what I think is going on with self-compassion and performance. If you want long-term success as an athlete versus burning out when you're 20, you got to bring self-compassion into it. Otherwise it gets hard and we burn out, and that makes it no fun. So that's a summary of where the literature is currently at when we're talking about self-compassion in sport. The future of self-compassion in sport. More longitudinal studies are going to be done. More intervention studies are going to be done. Hopefully the next steps will be to follow athletes over a long period of time, measure them multiple times, introduce a self-compassion program, and see how things are changing. See if self-compassion is related to improved performance across a season. See if self-compassion is increasing body appreciation versus just seeing these relationships. Here's a general trend, but we want to see if self-compassion is the thing changing these variables. So that's what's next to come when we talk about self-compassion in sport. I would love to hear your thoughts. Are you yay or nay on self-compassion? Give me a thumbs up if you feel like you learned something today and you're going to take a little nugget of information away. And subscribe if you want to hear more on the cutting edge research that's being done in sports psychology. We'll chat soon.